Gaming is becoming an expensive hobby. Recently, Nintendo announced that they're raising the price of Switch 2, which was already an expensive console for a lot of people, to $500 in September. This is really alongside all the other consoles, so the PlayStation and Xbox, which have also raised their prices over the years. We're starting to see a shift on how people spend time and money on video games, and I want to look at how us as indie game developers can possibly help fill that niche of people that cannot afford those big AAA titles and looking for a different kind of experience with the money that they do have. For a while now, gaming was pretty inexpensive. A lot of people from different backgrounds could afford a video game console and the games on it to play with. It used to be that you would have maybe one console per household, so you both have to share, and co-op was more popular, but now it seems to be that people with multiple kids, for example, would have multiple consoles, a console for each child, or even have both an Xbox and a PlayStation and even a Switch on top. However, this appears to be changing as we're seeing multiple rises in console prices and hardware sales plummeting. 2025 was a tough year. We saw many price hikers, both in subscriptions, so Xbox Game Pass increased their prices, but also in hardware prices. And in fact, even this year, we're looking at another wave. PlayStation increased their hardware price as well. Originally, just to give you how kind of crazy this, PlayStation 5 Pro launched in 2024, started at $700. This was already considered pretty expensive for what it was delivering. It was just kind of like AI upscaling, which didn't even support any other game, so that wasn't too great. And it received a price increase in 2025, which went up to $750, so a $50 increase. But then by this year, so 2026, they did it at a price increase in 2nd of April. That has now dramatically gone up to $900, so it's gone up a total of $200 in just 2 years. Xbox hasn't had a price increase this year, but I imagine it will. But currently, the price of a Xbox Series X digital is $600. It originally started off as $500. In fact, I don't think they even had a digital version, so the digital version is new. The instant result of this is that we're seeing console sales just rapidly decline. Less and less people on year are buying new consoles, which makes sense because they are very expensive and they are now a significant investment for some people. The Xbox, the least popular one, saw a drop of 70%, which is massive. But even PlayStation saw a big one of 40%, even though it's supposed to be the dominant console, but they're still seeing major sale declines. Now, currently, this is not really an issue because this is quite a new thing that's happened. The consoles have been around for a while, and so people have been able to come out and buy them before we've seen these price hikes because of the AI situation. But this could become an issue in particularly the next generation of consoles because some of the predictions are that they're going to cost about $1,000. These are just projections and predictions, so there's no guaranteed evidence. Whether these consoles will even release soon is up for debate as well. They could, in fact, change that because they could be too expensive and they find out not enough people are going to buy them. But let's say they do. Think of how possibly small the player base is because they are so expensive and not many people are going to buy the games that come with it, even if they do have a great catalog, because the upfront cost is going to be a lot. If a console was $1,000, that's probably not going to include games on top, which games can be priced at $80 or $70, which then makes me lead to the next thing, which is software price increase as well. For a long time, we were on $60 was pretty much normal for many years. I think it was 15 years. And then we saw a price increase of $70, which was, we were like, okay, that's kind of fair because it's been at that price for a long time, but they have been making a lot of profit from them, so it was a bit questionable. But now we've seen $80 with Mariokart World, which is kind of an exception because it was bundled with the console, and I think predominantly the majority of the sales came from the bundle of the consoles and not the standalone sale, and that's been the only example so far. We have seen subscription services increase price. Game Pass was one last year. It decrease their price this year though. They removed Call of Duty a part of the Game Pass, but it was back down. That was because of the new CEO that went into power. However, it's still we're still seeing that we did still see that price increase. In fact, Xbox Game Pass when it first launched was absurdly cheap, and I knew that thing was just going to go up in price once they wanted you on the service, and then they would slowly increase the price so they could make actual profit from it. And because of this, spending among young people particularly has sharply declined. So April 2025 last year, Gen Z were 25% decline in spending in gaming. Overall, it was 13%, so it's not just gaming. But with an older generation, it was only about 5% because they have more stable income, probably have a home with a mortgage and all that, unlike young people that don't have that and don't have as much money to spend. Free-to-play games have become very popular because of this, because they don't cost anything to actually play. While they do have tons of microtransaction in, it still doesn't stop people from going in and trying out and playing the game. However, free-to-play games have really fragile ecosystems. So if you didn't know this, but about 10% of players make up the profit for a free-to-play game. So about 10% of people actually spend money on the game. That's substantial enough for it to keep it running. Everyone else is just kind of freeloading off of that. So it's as soon as some of those people drop off, you see a massive decline in revenue. So if you think about if you had 100 people, only 10 of those people would be actually spending money in the game enough to keep it afloat. And therefore, if one just drops off like a 1%, that would be a big decline in revenue. And we saw this with Epic Games and Fortnite. They said that Fortnite is no longer making as much money as they used to. Now, I think this is because of Roblox. Roblox has gone really popular, so that's their main competitor. But they laid off 1,000 staff because they're seeing that decline in sales. It's no longer making them as much money as they used to. It also seems that big AAA games with huge budgets are also struggling because they're still kind of developing a game at a time when people would still have enough money to spend it on. I think a big example is Ubisoft, where they are pretty much known for making kind of mediocre, okay games. Like, they're not terrible, like, you can have fun in them, but they're not like, oh my god, this is a must-have game. And it felt like it used to be that people would buy them, like Far Cry and Assassin's Creed, because, you could sink some hours in and have some enjoyment, but it's not like, oh, it's a must-have. And now that everything's gone up in price, they look at that and think, I'd perhaps not want that. I'd rather have this big, amazing game, like an Elden Ring or something like that, and save the money. And so they've seen just sales absolutely tank because people just aren't flooding to those markets anymore. People aren't buying. It used to work, but not anymore. We've even seen lower cost games, even free-to-play games, really struggle. Marathon recently came out and it's like a $40 to $50 game. It's not a $70 game, but yet it's not really attracted the amount of players it needed so far to sustain. Obviously, it's still running. We don't know how long it's going to run for, whether it's in a sustainable situation. But if I was like a player like that, look, well, maybe before $40, like I could try it out, have some fun with it. But now it's like I've already got this game. Do I ever want to waste that possible money to play it and not like it or not enjoy it as much? And I just feel like people are more price conscious because these games that are completely good and even arguably like justifiable for the price, it's just not good enough to get you over to try a new thing as perhaps before. Unfortunately, more people are taking up subscription services, so that's like Game Pass, which makes sense because the upfront cost of the software is so high that it seems to make more sense to just subscribe to it. A lot of people, it's not entirely important that they get to keep the game and that they just want to be able to play it. Now, I don't think this is great because it kind of means we're moving towards this subscribe and never own. So you never buy anything anymore. You just subscribe to it, and that means they can charge us. They can keep milking you for it. They can you have to, if you want to use it, you have to pay that monthly subscription, even if you've completed that game a long time ago. It's getting so bad that you can now rent consoles. You don't get to ever keep them, and this is unfortunately usually targeted at poor families who can't afford to pay for a console, and so they pay for this monthly renting subscription, and in the end they pay more because the rent eventually exceeds the actual price of the console, and sometimes it can be quite difficult to return it. Once you pick it up and then you have to, if you cancel it, you have to go back out and then give that console back, maybe return it. Like, that hassle can be a bit annoying. So how does this affect indie game developers, and how can we capture this issue that's currently going on? Well, we've seen indie games just become more and more successful. A lot of people are more excited for indie games rather than big AAA games because they are within an affordable range and provide a ton of value. We saw Silksong release, and that was hugely successful. Slay the Spire 2 release, and that was major success. And last year, the Expedition 33, which won a ton of awards and was also majorly successful. These games are priced lower, but also have many, many hours of content to sink into as compared to a AAA linear game. And the data backs us up with the indie game market going up. Steam now, 46% of the revenue is from indie games, so it's catching up with big AAA titles. Now, there's a bit of a caveat with that fact that 99% of the games that are put on Steam are indie games, but also a lot of those games are just people dumping their own projects on, which we've got zero marketing. It's going to be like AI slot games that we're never going to sell, so they're kind of like a bit, I would say, redundant data, so it's not people who are taking it too seriously. We saw Borderlands 4 released last year, and on PC it did not do too well, and it's no surprise. Firstly, the game ran horribly. You needed really good hardware to actually get any sort of decent performance. So people who didn't have the best hardware couldn't even play the game, so they were out. Secondly, it was priced at $70, so it was expensive. Plus, it also had a bunch of season pass and DLC that you could just buy and be showed at the start, which is off-putting for a lot of people. And so they end up saying, yeah, the game didn't do too well on PC. Like, no wonder. The game basically just didn't even run on PC, and it was very expensive. We would rather spend that money elsewhere. What we know so far is that people are being more careful with the way they spend their money, and they're looking at games that give them more value back. So a game that gives them more playtime, more replayability. This is why a game like Slay the Spire 2 did so well, because it is a roguelike, so therefore you put like hundreds of hours in and still get new content and new playthroughs. And there is some clear data on this, with roguelikes and roguelites being very popular and is a very fast growing genre, currently valued at 4.8 billion in 2025 and is projected to grow as well very quickly. And this is pretty clear because often roguelikes and roguelites are games that are pretty cheap because they're made by indie games, so they can be $10 to $20, and that they have this high player replayability, so you can spend many hours into it, unlike a $70 10-hour game. And there's nothing wrong with that 10-hour experience, and even at that price point, it could be a very story-rich, graphically impressive game that really captures your attention. But if that's like needs to last you for like a month or a few months, then perhaps that's not the best game for you at the moment. And if it's a $20 game, then you could buy multiple roguelike games that give you hundreds of hours rather than that 10 hours. So you've really stretched that dollar out. A more recent genre that's done really well in indie space is Friend Slot, which is a type of cheap game where you get a bunch of friends together and just have a laugh, really. That's what they are. They're kind of these non-serious games. And because of their low cost, it's like really easy just to ask your friends, like, hey, shall we try this? And it's like, it's really, it's less than, it's like a price of a coffee almost. And so you can get multiple hours at such a low price, which is why these games are doing so well. And you can like look past the lower quality because of the lower price. Like Lethal Company is really great. It's like a simple core loop and it's really fun with friends. And it's just kind of a hilarious experience. And so with this information, what kind of game should indie developers be making? Well, I can't really answer that, but it does seem to be clear that games that offer high value at a low cost are doing really well. I've seen a lot of devs say that you should make small games rather than big long dream games, which I have said myself, but perhaps a better word is smart games, because you could still make a good small game but it not sell well because it's just not what people are willing to spend money on. I recently saw this video by Branno called I Released a Game and It Failed Badly, and this is a game inspired by Dome Keeper. Now, a lot of people were commenting that the game's art was unappealing and the feedback to the player is not great, but it has a 2-bit color palette, and definitely when I looked at it, I thought that this is something that I'd play on itch.io, like a free browser game, rather than a game you'd buy for $8 on Steam. And this is what I mean by a game being a small game, but not necessarily a smart game, like it's a game that doesn't provide enough value to the player, as opposed to a smart game that could be small, but it offers that replayability and value that players want. Even if this game is good, it doesn't look like a game that people would buy, essentially. This is like such a prime example of it's easier said than done. Like, how could you predict that? How can you know what entirely the audience wants? If this is a good game sell well, you could get, like, this could have been like a demo on itch, and people were like, yeah, this game's fun. But then when it came to it being selling, people didn't buy it. Like, the game was fun, but it's not fun enough to pay for. However, releasing a game is a big achievement. Even if it doesn't sell well, you still learn a lot. Is that making more games means the more likely you are to get success, because I guess you figure out what works and what doesn't work. Not only in terms of what's popular, but in terms of what you're good at and what you're not good at. For me personally, I'm trying to put out as much content as possible to figure out what I'm good at and what I'm not. I did a game channel at the start of the year, which was an incremental game. I did like a little deep dive on it in my YouTube channel as well. And I thought I was going to keep working at what I did. It was a pretty good idea. And I still think that. But I don't really play incremental games. So I didn't really have too much passion into it. And I couldn't figure out what would be fun and what wouldn't. I actually had some cool ideas. Like the idea I was working on was sort of this crossbreeding with genetics among the plants, which I think is really cool. But I just couldn't figure out the balancing, couldn't figure out how it would play. And so I'm kind of like, hey, I'll cut my losses and I'll just leave that for now. Maybe I'll come back to it and use the tools. I'm currently working on a prototype for a roguelike extraction game. But I did a video on extraction games and how they could be really popular for indie developers because of a great loop, and how there's not much in the market in terms of single player extraction games. And so I'm trying out an idea for that. I also enjoy roguelikes and have played many different versions. Alongside that, I also enjoy extraction games. I really like Hunt Showdown. And so I have a better idea on what these games are good at. These games also offer quite a lot of value. They offer quite a high replayability because in a roguelike, each run is different. And in an extraction game, there's this like kind of reward of going in and making it out. And if you don't make it in, you need to go back in and start with a new character or bring in your stash. And so there's this good loop going on, offering high replayability. Anyway, I think that's enough talking from me. Comment down below what you think, and if you are a developer and are working on certain type of games, also provide your feedback. Like and subscribe, and do check out my other videos, especially the one about extraction shooters, where I go into detail about how this could be a big genre for indie developers. And I'll hopefully see you there.